The air on Viridia Prime was always sweet. It was a mix of exotic pollens and the faint, clean scent of the rain that fell every afternoon on the planet's floating continents. Jin found it pleasant, but it never distracted him. He sat perfectly still at the vast, circular negotiation table, his hands resting lightly on its polished surface. The material was cool and smooth, like stone, but it glowed with a soft inner light. Across from him, Ambassador Vral of the Triumvirate shifted, his carapace making a faint clicking sound. Vral was tall, with a long neck and eyes that were large, dark, and unblinking. To Jin, he looked like a praying mantis carved from obsidian. The other aliens at the table, a hairy Sauron delegate and a gelatinous glebe ambassador, seemed awed. This was a minor meeting. They were discussing agricultural export quotas, the kind of dull work that built the foundations of interstellar relations. The real power brokers of the galaxy were not here. Jin was fine with that. Foundations were important. His aide, Su Min, sat to his right. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her gaze was fixed on the data slate in her hands. She was monitoring the real-time translation algorithms and recording every word. Jin had worked with her for 5 years. He knew the slight twitch in her jaw meant she was irritated. The triumvirate translator was deliberately softening Viol's condescending tones, making his dismissive comments sound merely formal. The proposed volume is ambitious for a species with your limited orbital lift capacity, Vral was saying. His voice a dry rustle, translated into flat standard English by the room system. Jin smiled, a small, polite movement of his lips. Our lift capacity has increased by 40% since the last audit, Ambassador. The data was submitted. Perhaps your review teams are overworked. A flicker of annoyance passed through Vral's dark eyes. Humans were supposed to be emotional. They were supposed to either erupt in anger or become flustered and accommodating when challenged. Jin's calm, factual pushback was off script. Be that as it may, Vral said, waving a slender, 3-fingered hand. Quality standards are another concern. Your Terran biomass can be unpredictable, prone to disease. This was a common tactic. Question the product, question the seller's worth. It was meant to wear him down, to get a better price out of frustration. Jin was about to respond with another data point when a low hum filled the chamber. The glowing lines in the table flickered. The Sauron delegate perked up, its nostrils flaring. A power fluctuation? From the antechamber, a shout echoed. It was followed by a sharp electric crackle, the sound of a security stunner. Alarms began to blare, a harsh, pulsing siren alien to Jin's ears. What is the meaning of this? The glebe ambassador bubbled, its form quivering. Vral stood abruptly. A security incident. Do not be alarmed. Our protective units are responding. He gestured, and 2 triumvirate peacekeeping drones, hovering spheres of polished metal, the size of a human head, glided into the main chamber from behind a curtain. They were supposed to be neutral security, provided by the host, the Viridians. Chaos erupted from the antechamber. A Viridian guard stumbled back, clutching its side. A flash of light, a weapon discharge lit the doorway. The 2 triumvirate drones moved with sudden, jerky speed. They weren't heading for the door. They were fanning out into the room, their front lenses glowing with a targeting reticle. Instinct took over. Jin's calm shattered, replaced by a soldier's reflexes from a life he thought he'd left behind. Su Min down. He barked, his voice cutting through the siren. He shoved his chair back, not to flee, but to put himself between the nearest drone and Su Min. His hand went to his belt, not for a weapon. Diplomats carried none, but for a personal shield generator. It was a weak thing, meant for radiation or micro-debris that the drone's lens focused on him. It didn't scan. It locked. The glow intensified from yellow to a hot, piercing blue. "Ambassador Vroll, call off your unit." Jin shouted, his eyes meeting the aliens across the table. Vroll said nothing. He just watched. The drone fired. It was not a stunner. It was a focused plasma lance, a military-grade weapon. The bolt, bright as a tiny sun, lanced across the room. Jin's shield generator flared and died instantly. The bolt took him high in the chest. There was no dramatic cry. The impact was a hard final thud against his sternum. He was thrown back into the wall, sliding down to the floor. The smell in the air changed from sweet pollen to ozone and burned meat. Su Min screamed. It was a raw, human sound of terror and loss that seemed to shock the room more than the weapon fire. She had been knocked aside by Jin's shove, her data slate clattering to the floor, its screen still active and recording. The second drone swiveled towards her. A stray shot from the antechamber struck it, sending it spinning into the wall where it sparked and died. Suddenly, it was over. Viridian security forces flooded in from the main entrance, subduing what turned out to be a single, confused Saran smuggler who had gotten lost in the secure zones. The smuggler had a low-grade energy pistol. He had not fired into the diplomatic chamber. The silence after the alarms were cut was absolute, broken only by Su Min's ragged breathing. She crawled, a gash bleeding on her temple, to Jin's side. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling's graceful arches. There was no life in them. The hole in his jacket was small, neat, and black around the edges. Ambassador Vroll straightened his robes. He looked from Jin's body to the damaged drone, then to the horrified faces of the Saran and Glabe delegates. "A profound tragedy," he said, his translated voice regaining its dry calm. "A malfunction. The drone must have misinterpreted the human's sudden movement as a threat during the chaotic incident. Our most sincere regrets." Su Min looked up from Jin's body. Tears streaked through the blood on her face, but her eyes were not grief-stricken. They were sharp, clear, and burning with a cold, understanding fire. She saw Vroll's lie. She saw the way the drone had targeted, not scanned. She did not scream accusations. She did not weep. She slowly, carefully, reached out and picked up her data slate from the floor. Its recording light was still glowing. She tapped the screen, saving the file. Then she tapped her ear, opening a secure line to the human orbital shuttle. "This is Aide Su Min," she said, her voice quiet, steady, and terrifyingly devoid of emotion. "Condition black. Ambassador Jin is dead. Request immediate medical and security retrieval. We are preserving the scene." She stood up, ignoring the Viridian medics who were now approaching. She walked to the center of the room, placing herself between the aliens and her fallen ambassador. She said nothing more. She just stood there, a small, bloody, silent sentinel. The other delegates stared. They had expected human wailing, anger, threats, demands. They saw only this young woman, standing in protective silence, her slate held tightly like a weapon. The triumvirate's expressions were unreadable, but a faint unease seemed to pass between them. This was not the reaction they had planned for. This quiet was more disturbing than any shout. The news feeds would report it within the hour. A Terran diplomat killed in a tragic accident during a security scare on Viridia Prime. The triumvirate expressed condolences. The galaxy moves on. But in that silent room, as the sweet Viridian air began to wash away the scent of violence, something else had begun. Something cold and patient, and infinitely more dangerous than an accident. Su Min's quiet call had not just been for a medical team. It had been the first soft tick of a clock starting to count down. The human shuttle that descended to Viridia Prime was a sleek, gray vessel, unmarked by any military insignia. It moved with a quiet efficiency that matched Su Min's demeanor. She watched it land from the observation bay, Jin's body already prepared for transport in a sealed medical capsule beside her. The Viridian officials had offered condolences, their flower-like heads bowing. The triumvirate had sent a formal, cold message of regret for the unfortunate system's failure. Su Min had accepted it all with silent nods. She did not argue. She did not accuse. 2 human security officers emerged from the shuttle, their faces like stone. They wore simple black uniforms. They did not speak to the waiting Viridians. They went directly to Su Min, saluted the capsule containing Jin, and then carefully loaded it onto the shuttle. Su Min followed, her data slate clasped tightly to her chest. The ramp closed behind them with a soft hiss, sealing out the alien world. Inside, the shuttle's commander, a stern woman named Hana, simply said, "The orbital carrier is waiting. We will jump in 20 minutes." Su Min just nodded and took a seat. She pulled up the recording from her slate. On the small screen, she watched it again. The calm discussion. The alarm. The drones entering. Not from the direction of the threat, but from behind the triumvirate curtain. She watched Jin's protective movement, saw the exact moment the drone's lens glowed blue and focused. She zoomed in. The drone did not sweep the room. Its reticle snapped directly to Jin's torso and held. She saved copies to 3 separate, encrypted drives. One she kept. One she gave to Commander Hana. One was uploaded via a one-time pulse to a secure Terran network node. The evidence was now scattered, safe. The journey back to Earth was quiet. There was no talk of revenge. No tears, though the grief was a physical weight in Su Min's chest. The other humans on the carrier went about their duties with a focused silence. When they offered her food or a blanket, their eyes were hard, their mouths set in thin lines. It was a shared understanding, a silent conversation passing between them all. Something had been broken. Something needed to be fixed. On Earth, the news was released to the public. A simple statement. Ambassador Park Jin was killed today in a hostile action during diplomatic proceedings on Viridia Prime. An investigation is ongoing. We mourn a dedicated servant of humanity. There was no video. No dramatic speech from a leader. The statement was followed by images of Jin from his life with his family in earlier postings, smiling. The human networks played the clips, and the people mourned. They gathered in parks and public squares, leaving flowers. But they also watched the official channels, waiting. They expected a follow-up, a demand for justice, a declaration. It did not come. The silence from the government was profound. In a secure room deep beneath the United Terran Governance headquarters, Head of State Kim Ji-woo watched the same recording. The room was cold and lit by the blue light of holographic displays. To her right stood Fleet Admiral Lee Tae-ho. He was a man who carried his strength quietly, his uniform crisp, his eyes missing nothing. When the recording finished, the room was silent for a full minute. Ji-woo finally spoke, her voice soft. He pushed her out of the way. His last act. He identified the threat, Tae-ho said, his tone analytical, clean of emotion. The drone did not assess. It executed. See the energy signature change here? He pointed a finger, and the hologram zoomed in on the weapon's emitter. It shifted from a low-powered deterrent setting to a maximum kill plasma pulse in 0.2 seconds. That is not a malfunction. That is a command override. So it was an assassination, Ji-woo stated, not a question. It was a test. Tae-ho corrected gently. They see us as chaotic, emotional. They kill our diplomat in a crowded room, expecting us to scream, to threaten, to demand answers in front of the galaxy. They wanted to prove we are animals, unfit for the orderly politics of the stars. They wanted us to give them a reason to impose order upon us. Ji-woo leaned back. She looked at the frozen image of Jin on the floor, and then at Su-min, standing guard. "And what did we give them?" "We gave them silence," Su-min said from the doorway. She had been shown in, her wound now cleaned and bandaged. She looked pale but steady. They did not know what to do with it. Admiral Taeho gave a slow, single nod. Silence is a weapon they do not understand. Noise reveals intention. Silence hides it. It worries them. "What do we do?" Ji-woo asked, looking at the two of them. Taeho brought up a star map. Human space glowed a soft blue. Triumvirate space was a sprawling, arrogant red. They will be watching. They will expect our anger to take a shape they recognize. Fleets massing at their border with loud proclamations. Angry speeches at the Galactic Council. They are ready for that. They have defenses for that kind of war. He zoomed in on the border. They are not ready for a different kind. Operation Calm Resolve, Ji-woo said, the words not a question but an acceptance. "It is ready for your authorization," Taeho said. "Phase 1 is movement. Silent movement." Ji-woo stood. She walked to the window, though it showed only a simulated forest scene. She thought of her people mourning quietly in their squares. She thought of Jin's family. She thought of the cold, clicking face of Ambassador Vral, watching a good man die. "Authorized," she said, her voice still soft, but now it held the weight of stars. "Do not make a sound." Across human space, a signal was received. It was not broadcast. It was sent through tight beam laser comms, through encrypted data packets, through hand-delivered orders. On shipyards orbiting Mars, the work did not stop. It intensified. But the great klaxons did not sound. The news drones were not invited. Ships that were being built were finished with urgent, silent haste. Crews were recalled from leave with quiet phone calls. They reported to their stations without fanfare. In the asteroid belts, mining ships changed their cargo. Ore was refined, not for construction, but for munitions. Factory worlds shifted production schedules. Civilian freighters were quietly chartered by the government, their holds being filled with supplies. It was a colossal, planetary-scale mobilization. But it was done in the quiet. There were no rallies. No flags waved on news broadcasts. The economy, monitored by alien observers, showed a sudden, massive shift in resource allocation. But no one declared a war economy. A triumvirate spy satellite, disguised as a debris scanner, noted an unusual number of engine ignitions from the Seoul shipyards. It sent a report. Human logistical activity increased. Probable internal military exercises. No hostile transmission traffic detected. On Earth, Ji-woo went on a scheduled news program. She was asked about Ambassador Jin. She nodded, her face a mask of solemn grief. "We are heartbroken," she said. "We are looking into the circumstances of this tragedy very carefully. We urge calm and patience as we gather the facts." It was what a diplomat was supposed to say. It was perfect. It was a lie made of truth. The galaxy watched the humans mourn. They saw the flowers, the quiet tears. They saw the lack of action. The Triumvirate High Command reviewed the reports. "See?" One of them clicked. "They are sad. They will make a loud complaint at the council. We will offer compensation, and it will be over. Their emotional peak has passed. They were wrong. Humanity's emotion had not peaked. It had been buried. It had been compressed under immense pressure, transformed into something dense, focused, and diamond-hard. It was not fading. It was winding up, coiling tight in the deep, soundless dark between the stars, waiting for the moment to be released. The Grand Conclave Chamber of the Galactic Council was a monument to peace. Its dome was a perfect holographic projection of the galaxy, each star system twinkling. The benches were arranged in graceful spirals, and the air was scented with a calming mist. It was a place for talk, for procedure, for the slow and dignified dance of interstellar politics. Today, it was packed. News drones hovered silently. Delegates from 100 species murmured. The subject was minor asteroid mining rights in a neutral system. But everyone was there for the subtext. They were waiting for the humans. The triumvirate delegation, led by Ambassador Vuel, sat tall and still. They had submitted a bland report on the regrettable incident on Viridia Prime, attributing it to a drone software fault. They expected a performance. They expected a human in rumpled clothes, red-faced, shouting about justice and waving evidence. They were prepared for it. They had arguments about emotional bias, about the dangers of jumping to conclusions. They were ready to paint humans as unstable. The human seat had been empty for days. As the mining rights debate droned on, a side door opened. A young woman walked in. It was not a seasoned orator. It was Su Min. She wore a simple, dark gray suit. Her hair was neat. The cut on her temple was now a faint pink line. She carried nothing but a single data chip. She walked to the human podium with steady, measured steps. The murmurs in the chamber died down. This was not what they expected. Su. Min did not look at the triumvirate. She did not look at the news drones. She looked straight ahead at the council speaker, an elderly Soren. "By the right of urgent address," she said, her voice clear and calm, carrying through the perfect acoustics of the chamber. "The Terran delegation wishes to present new evidence." The speaker nodded, curious. "You may proceed." Su Min slid the data chip into the podium reader. The giant holographic galaxy above them dissolved. It was replaced with the recording from Viridia Prime. The room watched the familiar scene, the calm talks, the alarm, the drones entering. A ripple went through the crowd. They had all heard about this. They hadn't seen it. Then the recording zoomed in. It focused on the lead drone. The image sharpened, showing lines of code flickering on a sub-display visible on its shell. The code was triumvirate military script. As the drone's lens glowed blue, the code changed. A single command line flashed. Target lock, life, SIGN. Human ambassador class, maximum, termination. The recording froze on that line of text. A gasp went through the chamber. This was not a malfunction log. This was an order. Su Min's voice broke the silence, still calm, still quiet. This data was extracted from the drone's core memory before it could be wiped by triumvirate recovery teams. It proves the killing of Ambassador Park Jin was a deliberate, pre-programmed assassination conducted under the cover of a manufactured security incident. Ambassador Vrall shot to his feet. This is a fabrication, a crude manipulation by a grieving, primitive species. You expect us to believe. We do not care what you believe, Su Min said, cutting him off. Her voice didn't rise. It was like a sheet of ice. The sheer interruption, so calmly delivered, stunned Vrall into silence. In triumvirate society, interrupting was an unforgivable sign of loss of control. For a human to do it so quietly was deeply unnerving. She turned her head slowly to look at him for the first time. Her eyes held no hate. They held only a cold, final certainty. The evidence is verified by 3 neutral council species forensic tech guilds. The verification codes are being transmitted to all delegates now. Light pinged on 100 data slates across the room as the file arrived. The Glebe ambassador bubbled in dismay. The Soren speaker looked at his own slate, his furry face grim. He gave a slow nod. The verification is confirmed. The data is authentic and unaltered. The chamber erupted into noise. But Su Min just waited. She stood perfectly still at the podium until the speaker managed to quiet the room. All eyes were on her. What would the humans demand? A huge financial payment? The surrender of colonies? A public execution? Su Min took a small breath. The United Terran Governance, she said, each word falling into the silent chamber like a stone into a deep well, issues the following demand. The Triumvirate Ascendancy will surrender former Ambassador Viral and its Director of Security Operations, Prelate Caver, to a neutral judicial body within 72 standard hours. They will face charges of murder and conspiracy. That is all. She stopped talking. The silence was absolute. Even the news drones seemed frozen. That was it. No rant. No list of grievances. No threats. Just a simple, stark demand. Rawl found his voice again, a shrill click of outrage. You dare? You dare to demand the surrender of sovereign officials? This is an act of war. We will not be bullied by your emotional theatrics. Su Min didn't even look at him. She looked at the speaker. The demand has been made. The clock begins now. Then she did something that sent a cold shock through the entire galaxy. She stepped away from the podium. The other two human aides at the delegation bench also stood. Together, without a word, they walked out of the Grand Conclave chamber. They left the most important room in galactic politics in the middle of a session. They just left. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then, chaos erupted. Delegates were shouting. The Triumvirate were clicking furiously among themselves. The news drones zipped out after the humans, but the humans were already gone. Their shuttle lifting off from the council platform before any reporter could reach them. The story exploded across the galactic network. The evidence was damning. The human reaction was baffling. A simple demand, then walk out? No negotiation? It was not how things were done. Diplomacy was about talk, about posturing, about compromise. This was an ultimatum delivered with the finality of a judge's gavel. On triumvirate worlds, the response was mocking. Official channels declared the human demand, the irrational barking of a child, unworthy of consideration. They mobilized their fleets, of course, but it was a showy, public mobilization. Great warships paraded in home skies. Speeches were made about protecting sovereignty from primitive aggressors. They were preparing for the war they understood, a war of declarations and fleet engagements. On Earth, the public watched the galactic news. They saw the triumvirate mocking them. They saw the analysts wondering if humanity had just committed political suicide. And they said nothing. There were no angry counter-speeches. No leaks about military plans. The official human channels went silent. The great quiet had begun. In the command center on Earth, Admiral Teiho watched the triumvirate fleet movements on a hologram. He allowed himself a small, thin smile. They are moving their second and third battle groups to the Glycinus border zone. He said to Ji Wu, where we would be expected to attack. Ji Wu said, sipping a cup of tea. Double quotes, yes, they are loud. They are showing us their strength. They think we are planning a big, noisy fight at our mutual border. He zoomed the star map out. They are not looking here. His finger touched a dark, empty sector of space, far from the Glycinus border, a region of nebulae and dead stars. A region that, if one plotted a very long, very quiet course, led like a back alley to the soft, undefended underbelly of the triumvirate empire. And our guests? Ku asked. On schedule, Teiho said, moving in the quiet. On his hologram, tiny blue icons, representing human task forces, were creeping through the dark. They were not taking the direct route. They were moving through empty space, their communication lasers tight and focused, their engines running on low-emission settings. They were not shouting their coming. They were keeping their promise. They were being calm. They were being resolved. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for the human explosion. It did not come. There was only silence, deeper and more unsettling than any war cry. The 72-hour clock, visible on every news feed, ticked down. The triumvirate laughed at it. The rest of the galaxy watched it, and the quiet, and felt a first creeping finger of cold dread. They had begun to realize a terrible thing. The humans were not refusing to speak because they had nothing to say. They were refusing to speak because they had nothing left to say. The talking was over. The 72-hour deadline passed. It was marked across the galaxy by a simple, silent tick on countdown clocks. There was no fanfare. The triumvirate made a final, derisive statement, calling the human demand void. They expected, then, a noise to begin. They expected human fleets to come roaring out of warp at the Glycinus border, where their own grand armada waited. They were prepared for a glorious, televised battle to teach the upstarts a lesson. Nothing happened. The border region remained empty and quiet. For 6 hours, the galactic networks buzzed with confusion. Analysts speculated. Had the humans backed down? Was it a bluff? The silence was unnerving not then. At a lonely triumvirate border listening post in the isolated Caris sector, a junior sensor operator named Calyx noticed a blip. It was a tiny warp distortion signature, weak and fading fast. It was not the massive, rippling signature of a fleet. It was the whisper of a single small ship dropping out of faster-than-light travel. He leaned forward, his antennae twitching. Probably a comet or sensor ghost. His console automatically sent a standard challenge on all frequencies. A response came back immediately. It was not on the general frequency. It was a tight beam laser comm, directly to the outpost's receiver. The screen flickered, and a human face appeared. The man had sharp eyes, short black hair, and wore a simple black uniform. No insignia. He spoke in clear, unaccented standard. Triumvirate Outpost Carry 7. This is Captain Jae-Sung of the Terran vessel Jin's Justice. You are broadcasting from a militarized zone in violation of the Nebular Treaty of 2240. Stand by for inspection. Calyx froze. Jin's Justice? The name meant nothing to him, but it sent a chill down his spine. The human's tone was not aggressive. It was administrative, like a traffic controller issuing a parking fine. Before Calyx could respond or alert his commander, his entire console went dark. Not just his screen. Every light, every hum, every system in the outpost died. The emergency lights failed to activate. The gravity generator sputtered and stopped, sending Calyx floating from his chair in the sudden, weightless dark. He could hear the panicked clicks of his crewmates. Their personal communicators were dead. Their weapons would not power. They were blind, deaf, and mute in a cold, silent tin can. Across the entire Carry sector, the same thing happened. 5 listening posts, 2 patrol ships, and a small orbital defense platform. All went dark at the exact same moment. There was no explosion, no barrage of missiles, just nothing. Aboard the Jin's Justice, Captain Jae-Sung watched his tactical display. Hundreds of small, spider-like probes his ship had launched were now attached to the hulls of every triumvirate asset. They were not bombs. They were sophisticated electronic warfare and nanic pods. They emitted a blanket signal that told every triumvirate computer to shut down. Then, the nanites burrowed into external sensor arrays and communication dishes, physically dismantling them molecule by molecule. It was a systemic technological lobotomy. Sector is quiet. Admiral Jae-Sung said into his own still-functioning comm, on the bridge of the flagship Resolve. Orbiting in the dark nebula nearby, Admiral Taeho nodded. Proceed. From the shadows of the nebula, the human fleet emerged. They did not come in a glorious battle line. They came like a school of silent fish, slipping into the dead space of the Kari sector. Their ships were painted matte black, with no running lights. They moved towards the helpless triumvirate outposts and ships. Boarding shuttles, not missiles, launched from their bays. The triumvirate crews, floating in the dark, heard the thump-thump-thump of magnetic clamps on their hulls. Then the hiss of cutting torches. Human marines in sealed combat armor, their faceplates reflecting the terrified triumvirate faces, flowed into the corridors. They did not fire a shot. They used targeted stun fields and adhesive nets. They rounded up the confused crews, placed them in secure restraints, and took them to holding areas. They were efficient, clinical, and utterly silent. One triumvirate officer on the defense platform managed to get a hand-cranked emergency beacon to work for a few seconds. A screaming signal for help pulsed out into the void before a Marine calmly smashed the device. That one. Short scream was the only sound the triumvirate heard from the entire Kari sector before it went permanently. Utterly silent, the human fleet did not stop. Using the Kari sector as a door, they moved inward. The next system was a lightly defended supply depot. The same thing happened. First, a single ship, the ever-present Jin's Justice, would arrive. It would broadcast its simple, polite message. Then, the blackout. Then, the silent fleet would arrive to collect the paralyzed assets and stunned crews. Word began to trickle back to the triumvirate core worlds, but it was confused, fragmented. The humans are here. No explosions. Everything just stops. Panic began as a ripple, then a wave. The mighty triumvirate fleets, gathered proudly at the Glycinus border, were useless. The war was not happening where they were. It was happening in their backyard, in their supply lines, in their undefended colonial hubs. They scrambled to redeploy, but their huge battleships were slow to turn around. And as they moved, human signals intelligence tracked every order they sent. Admiral Tejo watched the giant holographic map in the Resolve's war room. Red icons representing triumvirate fleets were now scrambling chaotically, trying to chase ghosts. Blue human icons were a spreading stain of silence, cutting vital trade routes, capturing shipyards, and isolating planets. He gave the order for Phase 3. Small, fast human cruiser groups, waiting in ambush at key crossroads, engaged the first rushing triumvirate reinforcements. But they did not fight to destroy. They fought to disable. They targeted engines and weapon arrays with precise laser fire. They launched more of the EWA R-pods. They crippled the mighty ships, then moved on, leaving them adrift and powerless. The message was clear. We can destroy you, but that is not the mission. The mission is to make you irrelevant. On the core world of Triumph, the High Command was in chaos. Screens showed system after system going dark. No battle footage. Just status icons turning from green to a flat, terrifying gray. Where is their fleet? The Supreme Prelate shrieked. A technician, its limbs trembling, brought up the only visual they had. It was from a civilian mining ship that had fled the Vela system. The video showed the dark shapes of human vessels, black against the stars, moving around the Triumvirate's proud Vela station. Then, the video showed lines of Triumvirate soldiers and crew, unharmed but disarmed, being marched in orderly lines into human transport ships. It looked less like a battle and more like a police operation, a terrifyingly efficient one. They are not waging war, the technician whispered, the horror dawning. They are collecting a debt. The galaxy watched, now in outright shock. The news drones could not get close to human EWAR fields, blinded them, but the snippets of data, the silent gray icons on maps, the confused, terrified reports from refugees told the story. This was not the war anyone knew. There was no heroism, no epic clashes. There was only a relentless, silent, surgical dismantling of a galactic power. The humans had not shouted their rage. They had weaponized it into silence, and that silence was now swallowing the stars. The grand conclave chamber was silent once again, but this was a different kind of silence. Before, it had been the quiet of anticipation. Now, it was the heavy, breathless quiet of a courtroom awaiting a verdict. The holographic galaxy above was still there, but now large sections of triumvirate space were shaded not with the red of conflict, but with a neutral, opaque gray. Neutralized. The word had entered the galactic lexicon over the past week with terrifying new meaning. The human delegation entered. There were no guards. Just 3 people. Head of State Kim Ji-woo walked at the center, her face calm, her steps measured. To her left was Fleet Admiral Lee Tae-ho, his uniform immaculate, his eyes scanning the room once before fixing ahead. To her right was Aide Soo-min, who carried a simple folio. They took their seats at the human podium. They did not look at the triumvirate delegation, which seemed smaller, hunched, their proud carapaces somehow dulled. The council speaker, the old Soran, cleared his throat. His voice was hushed. The council recognizes the Terran delegation. Ji-woo stood. She did not activate the dramatic holograms. She did not raise her voice. She spoke as if she was in a small room, and every being in the galaxy was leaning in to hear. 1 month ago, she began, our ambassador, Park Jin, was murdered. The triumvirate called it an accident, a mistake. They believed this would show us to be weak. They believed that our love for peace was a fear of war. They believed that our grief would be loud and chaotic and easy to dismiss. She paused, letting her words hang in the air. The chamber was so still they could hear the distant hum of the station's life support. They were wrong. We are not a young species because we are new to the stars. We are a young species because we remember what it is to be wild. We remember what it is to have our backs against the wall. We have learned to temper that fire, to pour it into the molds of law and society. But do not mistake the mold for the metal inside. She gestured to Admiral Tae-ho. A simple star map appeared, showing the human campaign. It was a masterclass in strategic paralysis. You saw no great battle, Tae-ho said, his voice crisp and clear. You saw no glory. What you saw was a police action. A criminal syndicate, the Triumvirate High Command, ordered a murder. We served the warrant. We did not come for conquest. We came for 2 men and for justice. When their entire military structure chose to become an accessory to the crime, we placed it under arrest. He zoomed the map in on the drifting, powerless triumvirate battle fleets, on the occupied shipyards, on the blockaded worlds. We used force, yes, the minimum necessary. Our goal was not to break their ships, but to break their ability to harm, to silence their guns so we could hear the scales of justice balance. Ji-woo took over again. You believed a warrior must shout before he strikes. That rage must be hot. Ours is not. Our rage is the quiet of a deep ocean, the pressure at the bottom that can crush steel. You killed our diplomat, and in your arrogance, you expected the wail of a child. Instead, you received the focused attention of a surgeon. You mistook our calm for compliance. It is not. It is a choice. She now turned her gaze, for the first time, directly to the triumvirate delegation. To Ambassador Vral, who would not meet her eyes, the choice was removed. So we showed you what happens when humanity is not given a choice. We do not revel in war. We see it as a profound failure. But if it is forced upon us, we will not fight for glory. We will fight to end it, completely, efficiently, and with a finality that ensures it need not happen again for a very, very long time. She nodded to Soo-min. Soo-min opened her folio. The terms, she said, her voice as steady as it had been in that bloody room on Viridia Prime. 1. The individuals Vrol and Kyver will be surrendered to a neutral tribunal immediately. 2. The Triumvirate Ascendancy will disband its strategic military command and submit to a galactic oversight council on arms development for a period of 1 standard century. 3. Reparations will be paid to the family of Park Jin and to cover the costs of this operation. 4. All captured personnel and assets will be returned once the above conditions are verified. She closed the folio. These terms are not negotiable. They are the consequences you chose when you pulled the trigger. The silence returned. It was broken by the sound of the Triumvirate Supreme Prelate's voice, transmitted from their homeworld. It was a broken, staticky thing, stripped of all pride. We accept the terms. There was no celebration in the human delegation. Ji Woo gave a single, slow nod. Then the operation is concluded. Our forces will begin their withdrawal. The blockade will lift upon the surrender of the criminals. Admiral Tae-ho added one final thing. Do not take our withdrawal for forgiveness. It is a return to our choice. The choice to be calm. See that it is not removed again. The session ended. The galaxy watched, stunned, as the human delegation left the chamber as quietly as they had entered. The news analysts were speechless. There was no victory parade to report. No triumphant speeches. On Earth, in a small, quiet cemetery in a place called Seoul, a simple ceremony was taking place. The rain fell softly. Jin's family stood under black umbrellas. Ji Woo, Tae-ho, and Su-min stood with them. Wearing plain-clothes, Datsu-min stepped forward. She placed a simple, hand-carved wooden post at the head of the grave. It was a jang-seung, a traditional Korean guardian spirit post. Its face was painted with a fierce but calm expression, meant to ward off evil and watch over the village. He was our guardian, Su-min said softly to Jin's wife. Now he can rest. We will watch for a while. As they stood in the rain, news feeds showed the first human ships, their matte black hulls now reflecting starlight, turning away from triumvirate space. They were not racing home. They were moving at a steady cruise speed, orderly, calm, across 1,000 worlds. In 100 different species command centers and living rooms, the understanding settled like a physical weight. They had witnessed something that redefined power. The triumvirate had shown the galaxy the fear of loud, brutal force. Humanity had just shown them something infinitely more terrifying, the quiet, certain force of inevitable consequence. The message was not carved into planets or shouted from ships. It was etched into the memory of every starfaring race. Humanity's diplomacy is a gift. Their war is a judgment. And the time between the two is filled with a silence that is no longer peaceful, but profoundly, respectfully feared. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, looking upon the small blue world with a shock that would take centuries to fade.